Ache Willow, Season 5, Chapter 1, Between History and Family. We've all been there, haven't we? It happens in our youth mostly, when we're on the cusp, like a drop of balsamic vinegar at the mouth of the bottle. We teeter and hesitate, caught between numerical adulthood, when we're bestowed all of the privileges of our age, and true adulthood, where the weight of responsibility settles upon our shoulders. Eventually, that drop picks a side. We either slide back within the bottle, avoiding a little longer the duties destined to us, or we crawl slowly on the side, leaving behind a dark stain as we disappear with every inch further down we slide. There, we learn of untold bizarre decisions we never would have considered as children, or those that were glimpsed seemed far more trivial than they turned out to be. Take, for instance, food, a subject not unfamiliar to me. As children, we're fed the familiar and the easy. Meals are decided for us, prioritizing speed, ease, cost, or nutrition. Being asked what we want to eat is a selfish indulgence at that time in our lives. Pizza, burgers, fries, and cakes, all joyous, fatty meals that are seen as luxuries to naive eyes. Eventually, we're allowed these choices more and more ourselves until every meal is decided either by gluttony or budget, our favorite treats at whatever price we can afford. Then, as inevitable as the passage of time, we come to that dreadful day. It attacks from the shadows, unexpected like an ambush. We have to choose our first meal meant for others. Do you think this is an easy task? If so, I envy you. Deciding how to feed others, especially those you know little about, is a moment as memorable and scarring as riding your first bicycle or that first time you go on a date. Such excitement, matched only by the traumatizing fear. How big the meal? How much should be pre-made and how much home-cooked? How many services can be handled and how can they be timed correctly? If you've gone through this, you know what I'm talking about. Now, imagine, if you will, wearing the apron when making such decisions for the life events of others. A cousin's bar mitzvah or a friend's wedding, each demanding nothing less than absolute perfection. For no matter how good the salmon Wellington might be, it's the undercooked meringue that they'll remember. If you can feel that cold drop of vinegar going down your back like it would the surface of the bottle, leaving the dark trail of dread with every inch, then you get it. But what if that life event is the one day that itself walks the line between memorable at all cost and best forgotten? What if you're preparing food for a funeral? Ever since I reopened the Ache Willow Cafe, catering has always been one of my favorite services to offer. Sure, the gigs are few and far between. Most people will prefer a stack of large pizzas or a tower of sandwiches from one of the few fast food places hidden here and there. However, when someone needs something special and delicious, they know to turn to me, Miriam DuFour, the little local food witch who can conjure gourmet meals ranging from soups to puddings, roasts to salads, and pies to marinades. In my hands, quantity is no rival to quality, as I can summon the mouth-watering enough to sate even the greatest of appetites. So when Meredith Mitchell passed away in her sleep earlier this week, it was no surprise that Horace Mitchell sought me out. Few things stand out about the Mitchells. Strange enough to blend into Ache Willow's particular social ecology, they raised snails as pets. Yet they remained somehow normal enough to never attract attention. If one thing could be said about the elderly couple, aside from the snails, it's how much they loved each other. Flirting with their late 80s, the two had been high school sweethearts, getting married right out of college. Their marriage was older than my parents' and more robust than even my best butternut squash soup. Will I ever know a love so faithful and enduring? I'd be a fool to hope so, but isn't the alternative a terrible waste? Terrines and verines, cocktail shrimps and onion canapes, anything but escargot, it's all here. While the Mitchells were not a wealthy couple, Horace wasn't going to allow his beloved Meredith into the great beyond without a proper send-off. I'm no monster either. I gave the poor widower as much of a bargain as was reasonable. Like I said, it's not often I get to cater, and I do love to indulge in the grand feast once in a while. "No one's eating," Annabelle says. She isn't entirely correct. There have been a handful of guests at the reception who have indulged in an hors d'oeuvre or two. Rare birds they are, and it's easy to think they partook only out of pity for me. "They will," I reassure my improvised assistant. I've been to events like these. I know what to expect. I needed someone to help out with the setup, service, and cleanup. With my usual employee, Stefan, handling the Aquilo Cafe, that left me few options. Annabelle stood beside me, a step behind, taking up the exact spot where I'd expect my conscience to be. But Annabelle is no manifestation of my better nature, the proverbial angel on my shoulder. Nor is she the devil. No, Annabelle occupies that space in between the two, where Olivia Figg has taken on a maternal role and Helen Edna, notary public, has stepped in as stern father figure of sorts. Annabelle has become that other member of my Aquilo family, the little sister. Besides, I continue, adjusting the position of a plate of mini quiche, this is all paid for already. Annabelle leans over to take one of the quiche, popping it in her mouth. A reproachful glare does nothing to provoke contrition or regret. Instead, a crumb-covered smirk and a toss of her short blonde hair challenges my authority. "Stop that. Or what, you'll fire me?" she swallows. "Besides, you made way too much food." This time, she's not wrong. In fact, the spread is so vast that I had to rent another chafing dish, which, in Aquilo, is no small feat. Not an inch of the white tablecloth on the table shows amongst the ranks of overflowing dishes. Yet still, there is more waiting to be warmed and served. Every guest of this small gathering could eat double, if not triple, portions, and there would still be plenty of leftovers. That is by design. Poor old Horace is unlikely to be in the mood to cook for himself in the next little while. I doubt the prospect of going out to eat will appeal either. A few days' worth of gourmet leftovers, some with perhaps a hint of DuFour magic to ease the pain, will come in handy. I rearrange the quiche to hide Annabelle's indiscretion, just in time for a handful of hungry mourners to start lining up. It's a parade of familiar and semi-familiar faces. I watch Horace and Meredith's contemporaries file in front of me, answering their myriad questions about the fantastic and occasionally strange hors d'oeuvres arrayed before them. To some, I point which foods are softest. To others, I warn away from desserts that contain nuts. It's as much about service as it is managing their medical needs. While the panoply of delectables is certainly an attraction, quickly confirming my certainty that the small crowd will eat, to many, there's something far more interesting to look at. Me. To some, Doris was a contemporary. To others still, Philemon would have been an ancient crone at the time they were children. Today, those who might not drop by the Aquilo Cafe so often, they get to study the latest generation of DuFour women in the flesh. In turn, and with a smile, I try to read the lines in their faces as one might the carvings of a lost civilization. What do each know about the DuFour? Which of these wizened men and women have benefited, or suffered, from my predecessor's magics? Who among them can see me, not as the sometimes dour, sometimes perky new owner of the Aquilo Cafe, but as another witch in their midst? And what does it mean to them? Strange, isn't it? Horace. The old man, bald and wrinkled like used leather, wears the smile of a man who has exhausted his supply of anger and sadness. His plate is already piled high with exactly one of each of the bite-sized meals I made for him. I'm sorry? Being stuck with all these codgers, all waiting to see who will be next in the box. The lady next to him, hair a pastel mauve, gives the bereaved old man an unpleasant look. All the while, Horace continues, ignoring her, being as young as flowers in spring. It's fine, I pour some coffee for another man in line. It's like being surrounded by well-honed wisdom. He nods the nod of a man who would have rather laughed, stretching his smile as far as grief will allow. We do look like a band of old wizards and witches, don't we? Might as well be pulling out the cauldrons and robes. Next to me, at the corner of my eye, I catch Annabelle's hand pause at the mention of witches. Horace takes a bite of one of the quiche, his expression one of muted delight. This is good. Glad you like it, I wink. Even if I was aiming for delicious, I'll take a good. I'm not the one who enjoyed quiche. I usually find them a little bland, but this is good. Meredith loved quiche. All of this. Horace waves at the table that separates us, nearly knocking the plate out of the mauve-haired woman's hand. They were all Meredith's favorites. That's why I ordered them. Tears wet his eyes, and mauve hair puts a gentle hand on his forearm, giving it a little squeeze he barely notices. Horace, she whispers. The old man ignores her. Dabbing at his cheeks with his tie, he does a commendable job of pulling himself together. Plate still in hand, Horace looks around, taking stock of those around him. He nods at his friends, all of whom look at him with concern. The smile, stretched and thin, returns to his face, persisting in its weak attempt to hide the pain. Finally, his cheeks somewhat dry, composure hastily reassembled, he looks up. His head cocks while his free hand tries to flatten the tear-stained tie back onto his shirt. It's as if he's seeing me anew, rediscovering the woman he hired to cater his wife's funeral reception. You know, he says, almost detached from his own grief. You look a lot like her. Meredith? I ask, knowing that can't be right. Meredith was tall and lithe, even in her old age. Her cheekbones rode high upon her face, forcing laugh lines to frame powder blue eyes. She must have been stunning in youth, but became something almost elven in age. No, not Meredith. Doris. I smile at the familiar comparison. You're not the first to make that comment. I wish I could have met her, not Doris. He cuts in, almost rude in his manner. There's a passing resemblance, but no. Horace leans in, putting his plate down atop the quiche, crushing them under the weight. The smile is gone, ousted by a sort of angry curiosity. No, not Doris. You're the spitting image of that witch, Philomene. It's amazing, the human capacity to function under trauma. Whether the damage be physical, adrenaline surging to compensate for malfunctioning organs and limbs, or psychological, with the brain compartmentalizing wounds to the psyche. None of these mechanisms make the impairment disappear. They're biological and psychological bypass valves, temporary solutions used to stabilize the system until more permanent succor can be found. In the case of a wound, blood still flows and broken bones still grind. When it comes to the mind, however, the fractures and hemorrhages manifest as lingering thoughts and lurking emotions, whispers of the dread and anxiety that encroach into day-to-day activities. These whispers become shouts during the quiet hours of the night as one attempts to find the sweet respite of slumber, which is why, on this terrible Monday morning, I find myself struggling to open up the Aquilo. Tasks as simple as twisting the key in the lock feel arduous and demanding. A burgeoning day casts its pink hue on the clouds above, highlighting in particular the large cumulus that sits permanently above downtown, the subject of worship by some of the locals. Sliding sheets of croissant into the oven is a positively Herculean achievement. The prospect of serving an endless horde of customers until Stefan takes over after the lunch rush is as daunting as fighting a dragon barehanded. All because I was robbed of sleep by an innocuous comment. That witch, Philomene. It's not so much that Horace, a man who must have been a child when Philomene was knocking at death's door herself, compared me to my long-dead relative. I've never seen a picture of Philomene, and it's the memory of her character, far more than her looks, that seems to have survived through the decades. It's that he called her a witch. 3 years ago, the comment would have meant nothing to me. Witch, old bat, granny. they're all just a list of dismissive words we toss around to describe old women. Except Philomene was a witch, and a particularly competent one, if the scant details I have about her can be believed. And above being competent, she was strange. If you think a witch is an unusual occupation for someone to hold, especially in this day and age, well, everything I've uncovered about Philomene suggests that she was as bizarre to witches as witches are to the average person. So when Horace Mitchell says, that witch Philomene, was that because of her age? The rumors that surely floated around such an eccentric old woman? Or was it because he knew her to practice witchcraft? Thoughts like these, especially to someone with my hunger to know more of the other DuFour witches, tend to gnaw away at sleep, eating every crumb of rest that might have been found. Alone with these thoughts, waiting for the timer on the croissant to ring, I sit on the counter of my cafe. Palms flat on the polished wood, I lean back, eyes riveted on the display of wooden spoons that are hung neatly above the register. Each belonged to one of the previous DuFour witches who inhabited Aquilo. Melody, Madeline, Elaine, Amelia, Philomene, and Doris. Each spoon is as different as these women were from each other, separated by time and philosophy, with only their occupation and genealogy to connect them all. And just like its owner did in life, Philomene's spoon stands out. Crude, worn, and uneven, it looks almost primitive in design. My usual, a familiar deep voice calls. And just like that, the dread thoughts are pushed away to the edge of my mind. You don't have a usual, sir. I jump off the counter, turning to face my customer. My hands busy themselves flattening the fold of my apron as I do a poor job of hiding my excitement. Tall, dark, and ridiculously powerful in build, Edmund Gulliver Kemper walks over to the counter to take a seat. Gulliver, as he prefers to be called, used to drop by at least once a week, staying for the length of my shift or more. Easily my best customer by volume, he would eat and drink tremendous amounts of whatever I made that day. Aside from the obvious financial hit, Gulliver's declining presence also meant the loss of my very first friend here in Aquilo. Oh, he still shows up, like this morning, but outside of his deliveries, it's become an infrequent treat. Maybe saying I lost him as a friend is overly dramatic, but there's now this barely tangible barrier separating us, like a curtain of cheesecloth filtering our relationship. All because of one annoying fly in the ointment. Then give me 5 of whatever you think I'll like best. He smiles, perfect white teeth on full display. I do my best to return the expression, but it's a struggle. My entire face fights back as I try to show anything but apprehension. I'll do my best to remember. It's meant to be a joke, but the words taste bitter as they leave my mouth. To avoid seeing Gulliver's reaction, surely a faltering of his grin, if not a deadly wound to his good humor, I busy myself choosing pastries from the display case. Of course, I remember what he likes. Gulliver likes everything I make. He's the most useless food critic in the world, devouring whatever I put in front of him like a kraken in a shipyard, never saying a negative word. But oh, how good his patronage is for my cook's ego. What brings you around today? I slide a large plate with a butter croissant and a chocolatin, 2 macarons and a decadent cinnamon roll, still warm and covered with melting icing. His answer is long to come. Gulliver's mouth would rather be filled with macarons and pastries than conversation. Finally, seeing his careful chewing and the voracious glee in his eyes as he savors every bite, I can manage a genuine smile of my own. He's moved on, in a way, but he's still the same Gulliver I met on my first trip to Aquilo. I'm making a delivery, he answers. Deliveries are on Friday, my dude, and usually in the afternoon now, aren't they? Something is off. I see it now. He's expecting something. Brown liquid eyes shift towards the door every few seconds. It's just the one package. Usually, Gulliver's arrival is heralded by the thunderous growling of his massive truck. Often the trailer will obscure the sun, casting its shadow onto the front of the cafe. These last few months, he's been parking up the street for reasons both painful and technically none of my business. All right, where's the package then? His glance lingers on the door still, fingers picking at the crust of the chocolatin, undressing the sweet chocolate within. It takes a moment, one stretched to agony, before someone steps in front of the door. For the tiniest fraction of a second, I expect it to be Gulliver's girlfriend, which would have soured my mood for the rest of the day. Instead, the chimes of the Aquilo sing their song and welcome a far more unexpected visitor. The bells seem to ring longer and brighter, making a meal out of this particular arrival. Tall, broad, and blonde, this visitor takes every one of his steps with timid care. His is the walk of a man entering a hospital room or a pottery shop. He's wearing unusually warm clothes for the season, blue jeans and a tattered tan knitted sweater that makes him look like a lost fisherman. I can't believe you, of all people, opens up her shop at this ungodly hour, he says, dropping a huge backpack to the floor and spreading his arms wide. Let me explain something. I'm no athlete. Sure, at a glance, you'll notice that my arms are thick and strong. Make no mistake, that is from years of stirring thick dough and carrying massive pots of soups and stews. My legs are also sturdy, but that's from walking back and forth between oven and counter, not running long-distance marathons. That being said, I leapt cat-like over my counter, unwilling to let the distance of going around slow me down. I slam into the man's chest with the force of a freight train, wrapping my arms around his back. If I'd known you were coming, I wouldn't have opened up shop at all. After a moment, I feel my hug returned, and for the first time in a long while, I'm reminded of the subtle warmth of family.
All right, I'll bite. Who's the snack?
When Annabelle walked in, sometime during mid-morning, she did a double take that everyone in the Aquilo must have noticed. With very little imagination, one could hear the crack of her neck as it snapped back to get a better look at the tall, blonde stranger. She sat, automaton-like, on her usual stool, right next to him, never tearing her eyes from his frame. I served her the usual of black coffee, adding a pair of green pistachio macarons. She must have noticed them, or at least her hands did, picking up the drink and food with robotic accuracy, consuming it out of habit. For almost 30 minutes, she remained there, studying every inch of the man, going so far as to smell the air around him. I bet, if she was an artist, she could have drawn him from memory. "Pardon?" the man asks, less offended than amused. "That's Eric," I answer, refreshing both their mugs. "My brother." True to her nature, Annabelle remains unfazed, barely tearing her eyes from Eric long enough to acknowledge me in reply.
Oh my God,
she mutters.
They made a male version? Does he bake too?
During this whole exchange, my brother remains calm, but infinitely amused. Each minute of Annabelle's infatuated attention pulls at his cheeks, growing his smile ever wider. I could tell that he's at the very edge of laughter the whole time, and now it all boils over.
"I've been known to make a decent scone,"
he claims through a chuckle.
"Don't threaten my friend like that,"
I butt in.
"I've tasted your scones."
"Bertrand likes them," he shrugs.
"Bertrand would have eaten baked mud if you told him it was cake. That man was devoted to you in a laundry list of unhealthy ways. And he wasn't too bright either."
I've seen Annabelle objectify men before, so the pattern isn't exactly new, but there's something a little predatory about when it's my own brother. The way she looks at me, unblinking doe eyes, pleading as if I could give her permission to take Eric home.
"Oh, I bet his scones taste wonderful,"
she says, barely a few decibels above a whisper. Her hand reaches out, and with an outstretched index finger, she pokes at his bicep. I can see Eric tense his arms, making sure she feels nothing but taut muscle for her effort. The whole scene makes my skin crawl. I'm not sure if it's because my Aquilo sister is flirting with my biological brother, or if it's the age difference, but unlike Eric, I am not amused.
"Okay,"
I say, slapping her fingers away from him.
Is your ego properly inflated, Eric? Can you put the poor girl out of her misery quite yet?
Eric, the charming devil, brushes a stray wisp of hair from his forehead before taking Annabelle's hand into his own. The tremor that goes down her whole body nearly makes the dishes rattle on the counter. He smiles and somewhat condescendingly pats the back of her hand.
I'm sorry, he says. Annabelle, right?
She nods, not even wondering for a second how he knew her name.
I'm flattered, I really am, but I'm taken.
I expect my friend to go through the brief disappointment of a crush denied. I know her to bounce back quickly. Annabelle isn't one to attach much importance to the ephemeral. She has this sort of strange wisdom of the youth going for her. Instead, she keeps smiling at my brother, patting the back of his hand in return, squinting like she knows something he doesn't.
Oh, it's fine,
she says, unharmed by the letdown.
I know how museums work.
Perplexed, Eric tilts his head, as if he could hear her intent better that way. She means, I explain to expedite this awkward mess of a moment,
look but don't touch. Expect a lot of leering for a few days.
This, of course, does not bother my big brother. There was a time when he had a much chubbier bent to his physique. I'm not going to take the blame for it. His appetite is his own control, but my endless experiments in the kitchen as a teen probably didn't help. I have a powerful urge to keep playing referee to their conversation. Annabelle is usually such a social samurai, precise, graceful, and always a few steps ahead of those around her. However, when she gets this way, fawning like a schoolgirl, she might as well be a slapstick comedy act. But I am at work, and Pat is waiting for me at the register, followed by a reasonable line of customers. I put a cookie on a plate and offer him a large coffee, ring him up, and greet my next client with a broad smile. All the while, I keep my ears perked, monitoring the back and forth between my two so-called siblings.
So,
Annabelle starts, turning her whole body in Eric's direction, sitting cross-legged on her stool.
Miriam's big brother. Oh, the stories I'll have to bribe out of you.
And just like that, Eric is off to the races. I get in a fight with the coffee machine, narrowly avoiding a scalding burn to my hands, all while hearing about that time I decided to attempt a tomato cake, which, I swear, is a thing. Then I serve Orleans and Alessandria, the two clowns who style themselves the local Inquisition, listening to the tale of how I successfully bribed a teacher in high school, trading a passing grade for a fancy cake in the shape of a car for her son's birthday party. This went on for hours, capping off the morning and digging deep into the afternoon. Even after Stefan took over for his shift, I could not wedge myself back into the conversation. Nature and biology, however, are not to be denied. A full day of eating macarons, cookies, and drinking tea and coffee will have the better of anyone. It was inevitable that one of them would fall victim to their own bladder. As luck would have it, Annabelle found herself lacking.
She is a delight,
Eric says, looking at her walking to the back of the cafe.
You're doing so much better picking friends these days. You sound almost smitten,
I tease, pulling the crust off a croissant sandwich I'm nibbling on.
Oh, not at all, but I would adopt her in a second. Mother, I hope not. I'd never get to talk to my brother again.
Eric smiles and nods, lips tight and eyes avoiding my own.
All right, I get it. In my defense, you are working your big, important job in your very own awesome coffee shop. I had to keep myself busy without getting in the way. Fine, just be careful what hearts you break.
Got it, he assures me with a wink. My fears remain intact. I know him, and I know how much he enjoys the accolades, even when they're from women. He worked hard to achieve his physique and works even harder to maintain it. Sighs of longing are his compensation. I shake my head and smile, if only because what else is there to do?
Are those it?
He nudges his chin above my head. I twist my head around to see what he's talking about, though I don't have to. Somehow, I never get tired of looking at them. Those 6 wooden spoons and the brass plaques underneath each. Melody, Madeline, Elaine, Amelia, Philomene. And at the very end of the line, Doris. These are the women who came before me, the witches of Aquilo.
That's them,
I confirm.
Your ancestors and mine. Wow,
Eric mutters, a wonder ethereal slipping through his breath.
Wow, indeed. 6 generations and barely any history about any of them.
Eric stands over his stool, palms flat on the polished wood countertop. He leans forward, his chin inches from the back of my head. We're not big on family, my branch of the DuFours. Dad wasn't close to his siblings and had some falling out with his own parents. We would see the other branches of the tree around the holidays or whenever someone would die, but neither Eric nor I were encouraged to seek out and spend time with cousins, aunts, and uncles. They were names traded around the dinner table on occasion, but seldom were there times when we would share meals with them. If anyone in the DuFour family knew more about Doris, or any of the others, that information never trickled down to Eric and I.
All right,
Eric says, sitting back down.
Let's see them.
This is why he's here. Sure, Eric is taking a year off after graduation before putting his architecture degree to use, but his main purpose in Aquilo is to help me figure out who Doris, Philemon, and the others were, or failing that, find someone with the DuFour family name who can. I pull down the plaque with the spoons and lay them down in front of Eric. His eyes are already scanning each of them, analyzing details that I'm simply not trained to look for. The whole dining room loses some of its hustle and bustle, growing quiet in the moment. Even Stefan, who knows better than to meddle in my affairs uninvited, stops what he's doing to look over. After all, it's not every day that I pull down the spoons. I might as well have drug in all the DuFour witches' headstones into the cafe.
Well, I can't tell you what that first one was.
Eric starts his analysis.
It's so old it might as well be petrified. Looks like a light wood, but feels like a hardwood to the touch.
His fingers run along the length of the spoon with a reverence that's almost sensual in its attention. Makes me thankful Annabelle isn't back from the restroom yet.
That one is oak, which isn't the kind of wood I'd expect a spoon to be made of.
That's Madeline's spoon. It retains some color despite the age, unlike Melody's, which has turned a tan gray over many decades.
These two,
he points at Elaine and Amelia's,
are obviously maple. I wouldn't be surprised if they were carved from the same tree. Look how similar the grain is.
You can tell? I ask, frowning in doubt.
Not with any certainty, but they also look about the same age, don't you think?
I shrug. Though it makes sense that, of all the DuFour witches, these two would have similar cooking implements. Whatever little I've dug up about the women points to them being unusually close. Finally, we come to the one spoon I'm really curious about. The strange and misshaped utensil of Philemon DuFour. It's large, clumsy, and asymmetrical, with a clear indication that it was hand-carved by an amateur. The wood is darker than the maple, but with desaturated hues, like the skin of a corpse. Eric runs his thumb on the handle before unfastening it from the board. He holds the spoon to his nose, struggling to pick up any residual scent from the essence. For a long minute, he turns the spoon over in his hands, studying it from every angle. At long last, he holds the utensil in front of his face, knitting his brow and shaking his head.
I don't know,
Eric admits.
It's got the texture of an apple or cherry, but the grain reminds me of willow.
I can't say I'm surprised. Eric isn't the first person to examine the spoons. None have gone so far as to draw the parallel with fruit trees and willows, but none have been able to claim certainty over the wood's origin.
Don't care to venture a theory?
I ask, an expectant grin on my face. Eric looks around, tapping the spoon on his forehead to indicate he's thinking. His eyes land in turn on the logo printed on his mug, then the same logo etched into the front window, his smile widening with each instance of the iconic image.
It wouldn't happen to be from an aquilo, would it?
He says it in jest. Eric knows woods. Woodworking was the starting point in the career path that led him to architecture, with carpentry somewhere in the middle as a stepping stone. There's really only one response to his question, an answer echoed over and over to me in the last 2 years. Can't be. I take the spoon from him, tapping the top of his head one more time. There's no such thing as an aquilo tree. Aquilo is written by J.F. Dubeau and narrated and produced by me, Amy Frost. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast platform. Want to support the show? Buy us a coffee. Go to ko-fi.com/Aquilo to donate. Aquilo has a Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Aquilo for details. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under the username Aquilo.